In a high-stakes showdown, a nominee faces off with Schiff over Trump's immunity and the January 6th evidence. Will they stand their ground, or will they cave to pressure? Secrets are being uncovered, and you won't believe how this ends. Watch till the end to see if the nominee folds or fights back. Chapter 1. The immunity card. Is it too late to stop him? Schiff sat across from the nominee, his gaze intense, his voice cold. The room was charged with tension, the stakes higher than ever. So the Supreme Court ruling came down, huh? Now the president's got immunity. What does that mean for someone like you, the one who's supposed to hold him accountable? The nominee shifted in their seat, looking uncomfortable but trying to maintain a calm facade. They had anticipated tough questions, but this one hit harder than expected. Well, it means there are areas where the president's actions are protected, they said, their voice almost a whisper. Schiff leaned forward, locking eyes with the nominee. Protected? You mean free pass? He asked, his voice rising with anger. A free pass to do whatever he wants, even if it means breaking the law. The nominee swallowed hard, trying to keep their cool. No, it's not a free pass. It's about balancing power and protecting the office, they explained, their words cautious, as if weighing each one carefully before it left their mouth. Schiff scoffed. So, you're telling me that when the president makes decisions that could harm the public, there's nothing you, the Attorney General, can do about it? You're just gonna sit back and let him get away with murder? The nominee froze. They were on the spot now, trapped in a corner. The weight of Schiff's question hit like a ton of bricks. Could they really stand up to the president? Or were they just another puppet in his game? The nominee stammered, but the words didn't come out right. They looked down, trying to find a way out of the pressure, but there was no escape. Schiff wasn't done. No one's buying that, Schiff snapped. You're here to make tough calls. When the president crosses the line when he's wrong, you're supposed to say no, not just nod along like a yes man. Are you ready to do that? The nominee's throat tightened, and for a moment, they wished they could disappear. The truth was, they weren't sure they could stand up to the president. The power in the room was palpable, and Schiff's words were a dagger to their confidence. Schiff wasn't letting up. If you're not willing to stand up for what's right, then what the hell are you doing here? This isn't about playing nice with the president. This is about protecting the country. The nominee finally met Schiff's gaze. I'll follow the law, they said, but the words felt hollow. Would that be enough? Was that really all they were willing to offer? The tension was unbearable. The clock was ticking, and in that moment, it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on them. Would they rise to the challenge, or would they fold under the pressure? The answer would change everything. Chapter 2. The Smith question. Dodging the bullet. The pressure in the room was suffocating, and Schiff wasn't going to let up. He stared at the nominee with the intensity of a hawk hunting its prey. So, we've talked about the president, but what about Jack Smith? Do you think it's time to open an investigation on him? The nominee stiffened, their body language betraying them. They were clearly caught off guard, and it didn't take a genius to see it. For a moment they sat there frozen. Then they finally spoke, their voice just a little too calm. I need to review all the facts and evidence first. Not just rely on what the president's saying. Schiff's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a knowing smile. Is that your way of saying you're not going to rush into anything? Or is it just a polite way of saying no without actually saying it? The nominee shifted again, their discomfort only growing. I didn't say that, they muttered, though the way their eyes darted around said everything. They were avoiding the question, and Schiff wasn't about to let them off the hook. So you're telling me you don't already have an opinion on whether or not Jack Smith should be investigated? Schiff leaned forward, his voice lowering, the words coming out slow, deliberate. You're really gonna sit there and tell me you don't know? The nominee hesitated, clearly struggling to keep their composure. I'm just saying I need all the facts, they stammered, trying to defend themselves. But it wasn't enough. Schiff wasn't buying it. Let me guess. Schiff shot back, his tone laced with sarcasm. You'll just keep waiting for the right moment to look into it, huh? Just follow the president's lead, keep things nice and quiet, and hope it all just disappears. The nominee's jaw tightened, and for a split second, they looked like they were about to explode. But instead they clamped down, trying to maintain control. I'll make decisions based on what's right, they said. but the uncertainty in their voice was undeniable. Schiff shook his head, the frustration mounting. You know what's right? What's right is doing your job. Not sitting here hoping you don't have to make a call that could make or break your career. You're supposed to stand up for justice. That's the job. Or are you just here to collect a paycheck and avoid real decisions? The nominee flinched at the words, their face reddening. The room grew even more tense as the weight of Schiff's challenge hung in the air. There was no escaping it now. They were either going to make a move or sit back and let the world pass them by. Schiff wasn't finished. What's it going to be? You're going to stand up for what's right, or you're going to sit there and watch it all fall apart. The nominee took a deep breath, but it was clear they were struggling to keep up with the game. They had to choose their words carefully. Every sentence now felt like a potential mistake. The clock was ticking, and this was just the beginning. Chapter 3. The hard truth. Can you say no to Trump? The atmosphere in the room felt like it was about to snap, the tension thick and almost suffocating. Adam Schiff wasn't done with the nominee, and this time, he was going for the jugular. You talk a good game about reviewing facts, but here's the real question. Could you ever say no to the president when it matters? Would you have the guts to tell him something he doesn't want to hear? The nominee shifted uncomfortably in their seat, suddenly aware that they were under a microscope. I would, they said, their voice barely above a whisper, but even they knew it sounded weak. The room was quiet for a moment, and Schiff wasn't buying it. Oh really? Schiff shot back, his voice dripping with disbelief. You'd actually go to the president, look him in the eye, and say no when it comes to his decisions? You're gonna stand up to him when he asks you to bend the rules just like that? Schiff snapped his fingers for emphasis, the sound loud in the quiet room. The nominee tried to hold their ground. I'm here to do the right thing, they said, but it was clear they were starting to crack. The words felt rehearsed, like a politician reading from a script, and Schiff wasn't fooled. Well, if you're here to do the right thing, why don't you tell me this? Schiff's tone was sharp as a blade now. What if the president asks you to cover up something? Or worse, what if he asks you to tell the public something that you know is a lie? The nominee looked like they'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Their eyes darted around, searching for a way to escape the question. But there was no easy out now. Schiff was relentless, and they had to answer. I would do what I think is best for the country, they muttered. But it was clear that answer didn't have the conviction needed to stand up to the president. Schiff's eyes locked onto theirs, unwavering. What's that supposed to mean? You're here to protect the country, but are you willing to risk everything for that? 'Cause that's what it takes. Saying no to the president when it counts isn't easy. It means you're putting your career on the line. Your whole future. You sure you're ready for that? The nominee hesitated. The question was hanging in the air, and it felt like the weight of the entire country was bearing down on them. Would they stand up for what was right, or would they cave and let the president have his way? I can handle it, they said, though their voice didn't have the same fire it had at the start. The doubt was obvious now. Schiff wasn't convinced. You better be ready then, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Because in this game, when you start letting the president run the show, it's not just your job on the line, it's your soul. The room felt colder now, the nominee's silence more telling than ever. The challenge had been made. Would they rise to it? Or was this just another empty promise from someone too afraid to take a real stand? The clock was ticking, and the stakes were only getting higher. This wasn't over yet. Chapter 4. The Election Fraud Dilemma. Dodging the bullet again. The room grew even quieter, and Adam Schiff could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The nominee was squirming in their seat, looking like they were one question away from cracking. Schiff wasn't letting up though. He'd already seen the cracks, and now it was time to dig deeper. All right, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Let's talk about the election. You're telling me you're in charge of the Department of Justice, and you can't even say whether or not there was massive fraud in the 2020 election. The nominee's face paled for a split second. They had hoped to dodge this one, but Schiff wasn't letting it slide. I've heard all the rumors, the nominee replied, trying to keep their voice steady. But I can only speak to what I personally saw. Like what happened in Pennsylvania. Schiff's eyes lit up. Pennsylvania? Seriously? Is that the whole story? Just one state? You don't think there was anything going on in other parts of the country? He leaned forward, practically daring them to answer. You're telling me that all the claims about rigged voting and fraud, nothing there? The nominee opened their mouth but couldn't find the words. It was clear they were caught between the facts they knew and the political minefield they were treading. Schiff wasn't making it easy. So, you're going to let the president and his crew push these lies just like that? Not even dig into it further? Schiff was almost sneering now, his frustration palpable. Do you honestly think people aren't watching? They know what's happening. They want the truth. The nominee shifted again, their eyes darting from Schiff to the table in front of them. It was almost like they were searching for an exit strategy, but there was no escape. I'm not saying I won't look into it, they mumbled, trying to gain some ground. I'm just saying I need facts, not hearsay. The law is the law. Facts. Schiff scoffed. You're playing it safe, huh? Is that your strategy? Look, if you really want to be in charge, you need to take a stand. People are dying to know what's real and what's not. You're just sitting there, letting the lies spread like wildfire. The nominee's hands clenched into fists on the table. They didn't know how much more of this they could take. This wasn't just about the election anymore. This was about their ability to make a decision, to show that they were strong enough to fight the political machine. I'll investigate if I have to, the nominee finally said, though the words felt like they were more for themselves than for Schiff. Schiff wasn't done. You don't have to, he shot back. You should. You should be the one standing up, telling the truth no matter how hard it is. You think people are going to forget about this? You think they'll forget how you sat there and played nice while the country was falling apart? The nominee stared at Schiff, feeling the weight of those words. There was no easy way out now. They had to choose. Fight for the truth or let the lies take over. The clock was ticking, and there was no going back. Chapter 5: The Pardon Dilemma. Who gets a free pass? The air in the room was thick with tension, like a storm about to break. Adam Schiff's eyes never left the nominee as he threw the next grenade into the conversation. All right, let's cut to the chase. The president's been pardoning some serious criminals. What about those guys who beat the hell out of police officers on January 6th? Would you advise him not to pardon them? The nominee's face went pale. For a moment they just sat there frozen. It wasn't the question they had been expecting, and it sure wasn't the kind of question they wanted to answer. Schiff didn't give them any time to recover. Well, are you going to say something, or just sit there looking clueless? The nominee stammered, clearly struggling to find the right words. Pardons are handled case by case, they finally muttered, their voice shaking slightly. Schiff leaned in, his tone colder now. Case by case, huh? So you're telling me if the president decides to pardon someone who beat up a cop, you just shrug and say, okay, that's fine? You're not even gonna question it. Schiff's words hit like a punch to the gut, and the nominee squirmed in their seat, the weight of the question hanging heavy in the air. The nominee started, but Schiff wasn't having it. You're here to do your job, not to play favorites, Schiff snapped. This isn't about letting people off the hook because they're connected. This is about what's right. That's what you're supposed to be standing for. So tell me, would you let a violent criminal off the hook because the president wants to? The nominee clenched their fists, trying to control the rising panic in their chest. They knew they couldn't just give a vague answer this time. Schiff was relentless, pushing them harder with each passing second. I'll follow the law, they said, their words coming out more firmly this time, but the doubt was still there. Could they really hold their ground? You know what I hear when you say that? Schiff's voice dropped, now tinged with disgust. I hear you telling me that you're too scared to do the right thing. You're more worried about keeping your job than standing up to the president. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the nominee. Is that what this is? Because that's not the job I want you doing. The nominee's throat tightened. This was the moment that would define them. They could feel the eyes of the room on them, the weight of the decision pressing down. Would they be the one to protect the rule of law, or would they fall in line with the political machine? The words felt like they were stuck in their throat. I'll make the right call, the nominee said, but there was no conviction behind the words. It was a hollow promise and everyone knew it. Schiff wasn't fooled. Right call. Schiff's voice dripped with sarcasm. You better hope you know what that means. Because once you start pardoning the wrong people, once you let corruption slide, you're no longer doing your job. You're just another cog in the machine. You're just another pawn. The nominee's face turned red. The pressure was unbearable, but they still couldn't give a straight answer. Not yet. The clock was ticking and the world was watching. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 6. The Evidence Crisis. Will you let it disappear? The air in the room had grown heavy, like the calm before a storm. Adam Schiff wasn't wasting any time now. He knew he had the nominee on the ropes, and he wasn't about to let them off easy. Let's talk about the January 6th investigation, Schiff said, his voice steely. Are you prepared to ensure all the evidence is preserved? Or are you just going to let it slip through the cracks like we've seen before? The nominee froze, their expression flickering with uncertainty. The question hit harder than expected. I'll follow the law, they said, their voice a little too measured, a little too rehearsed. I'll make sure the proper channels are in place. Schiff's eyes narrowed. Come on, don't give me that bureaucratic answer. Are you really telling me that you won't personally take action to protect the evidence? You know damn well that we've seen too many cases where important evidence just vanishes when it involves the president. He leaned forward, the intensity of his words hanging in the air like a challenge. What are you going to do when someone tells you to destroy it? Are you going to stand up? Or are you just going to sit back and let it happen? The nominee's lips parted as if they were about to speak, but no words came out. Sweat beaded on their forehead as they struggled to find the right response. Schiff wasn't making it easy. You know what happens when people don't preserve evidence, Schiff pressed. We've seen it time and time again. People lie, they cover their tracks, and the truth gets buried. So what's it going to be? You're going to let that happen on your watch. The nominee started, but the words caught in their throat. The pressure was overwhelming, their mind racing as they tried to think of a way out of this mess. The room felt suffocating, every pair of eyes trained on them, waiting for them to crack. They could already feel the weight of the world on their shoulders. Schiff didn't give them any room to breathe. You've got one job here, and that's to uphold the law. That means no stone left unturned, no cover-ups. We both know the stakes, and I'm not here for excuses. He leaned in even closer now, his voice dropping to a whisper. What's it going to be? Are you the one who's going to stand up for the truth? Or are you going to let everything we've worked for slip away? The nominee shifted in their seat, their jaw tight. The pressure was suffocating. I'll follow the law, they repeated, but this time the words sounded hollow. There was no fire behind them, no conviction. It was as if they were saying what they thought people wanted to hear, not what they were actually prepared to do. Schiff wasn't done. The law isn't enough. Not when it comes to this kind of corruption. We both know how easy it is for things to go wrong. If you're not prepared to take a stand, if you're not prepared to act when it counts, then what the hell are you even doing here? The nominee looked down, the weight of the question hanging in the air. They could feel the eyes of everyone in the room boring into them. They could feel the pressure mounting, the clock ticking down. This wasn't just about protecting evidence anymore. This was about whether they had the courage to stand up to the president and fight for the truth. The room was silent, the tension unbearable. The nominee didn't know how much longer they could hold out. Chapter 7. The past will catch up, evidence never dies. The tension in the room had reached a boiling point. Adam Schiff wasn't about to let the nominee slide by any longer. He had the upper hand and he knew it. The clock was ticking, and it was time to test just how far this nominee was willing to go. He leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. You're telling me you'll protect the evidence? But here's the thing, evidence disappears when the stakes get high. We've seen it before with Trump. What's to stop that from happening again? The nominee's face tightened at the mention of Trump, their nerves crackling like static. They tried to maintain their composure, but it was clear the question had struck a nerve. I'll follow the law, they said again, but this time their voice wavered, a hint of uncertainty creeping through. I'll make sure the right steps are taken. Schiff's eyes locked onto them like a predator closing in on its prey. The right steps? The right steps? He repeated, mocking the nominee's half-hearted answer. You're telling me that when the president demands you bury something, you'll just play by the book and follow steps? You'll just trust the system that's been failing us for years? The nominee flinched. "I'm not saying that," they protested quickly, but their voice was weaker now. "I'll ensure all the protocols are followed." Schiff's face twisted into a grimace. "Protocols? Protocols won't save this country. You don't need protocols, you need to do what's right. You're the one who's supposed to stop this. And when the time comes, are you just gonna let the same people who've covered up Trump's mess do it all over again? Because that's exactly what will happen if you don't do your job." The room was silent. The nominee's face turned pale as they tried to gather their thoughts. For a moment they looked like a deer caught in the headlights. They had nowhere to hide, no excuse left to give. Schiff had them cornered and there was no way out now. "I'll make sure that evidence is protected," the nominee said. But the words felt like a desperate plea rather than a firm commitment. "I'll do what I can." Schiff's expression darkened. "What you can do? That's the problem. You're not here to do what you can do. You're here to make the hard calls, no matter how difficult. You're not some bystander. You're supposed to be the one holding people accountable, even when the pressure comes from the very top." The nominee's hands clenched into fists. The pressure was crushing, and they could feel the weight of the responsibility settling heavily on their shoulders. The truth was, they weren't sure if they had what it took to go up against the president and the powerful forces at play. They had always played it safe, always followed the rules. But now they were faced with a decision that could define their entire career. "Do you understand what's at stake here?" Schiff continued, his voice growing more intense. "If you let this evidence disappear, if you let the president's people destroy it again, then all of us are screwed. The country is screwed. You'll be the one who let it happen. You'll be the one who chose to stand down instead of fighting for justice." The nominee looked down, their mind racing. They could feel the eyes of the room on them, the weight of every word sinking in. The time for easy answers was over. There was no more room for excuses. It was time to make a choice. The room hung in suspended silence, the pressure building. Would they stand up? Or would they let the past repeat itself? Chapter 8. The breaking point. Will they crack under pressure? The room was suffocating now, each second dragging on like a weight too heavy to bear. Adam Schiff had been relentless throughout the entire conversation, and it was clear that the nominee was nearing their breaking point. The stakes had never been higher, and now the real question was, could the nominee survive the pressure, or was this the moment they'd fold? Schiff leaned forward one last time, his voice low, but carrying the full weight of everything they had discussed. "You've been dodging my questions, dancing around the real issues," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "But now it's time to face the truth. Are you really ready to say no when the president asks you to do something you know is wrong? Or are you just going to play it safe and let the country burn?" The nominee's eyes flickered, betraying the panic they were trying so hard to hide. They had avoided the tough questions for as long as they could, but now there was no escaping it. No more dodging. No more excuses. I'll do what's right," they stammered, but it was clear they didn't believe it themselves. Their voice lacked the confidence it had when they first walked in. Each word felt weaker, as if the ground beneath them was crumbling. Schiff's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Is that it? That's your answer? I'll do what's right?" His tone was sharp, laced with disbelief. "You're supposed to be the one standing up for justice, not hiding behind vague promises. You're telling me you'll do what's right, but can't even say whether you'll stand up to the president when it matters most." The nominee shifted uncomfortably in their chair, their breath coming faster now. I don't know if I can just..." They broke off mid-sentence, unable to finish the thought. It was obvious. The fear was consuming them. They weren't sure if they could take the heat. The pressure of facing down the president, of standing up for what was right, had started to crack their resolve. Schiff didn't let them off easy. "You don't know if you can? You have to. This job isn't about playing it safe. It's not about riding the fence and hoping no one notices. If you want to make a difference, you have to make a call. Are you in or out?" The nominee's hands trembled slightly, and they finally spoke, though the words came out more like a whisper. I just don't want to make the wrong decision." "That's the problem," Schiff snapped. "If you're afraid of making the wrong decision, you'll never make the right one. You'll just let everything go to hell. You'll watch while the president gets away with murder, and you'll be just as guilty." The room seemed to close in on the nominee, the walls pressing in tighter with every word. The sweat on their brow was visible now. They could feel the weight of their own indecision. They had been given a choice, a chance to do the right thing, but it was slipping through their fingers. "Make your choice now," Schiff said, his voice low but commanding. "You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. You've got one shot to do what's right. But don't take too long, because once you've crossed that line, there's no going back." The nominee's eyes dropped to the desk in front of them, and for a long moment they said nothing. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. The clock ticked on, each second stretching out like an eternity. Would they rise to the challenge, or would they crumble under the pressure? Finally, the nominee lifted their head, their face pale, their voice barely audible. I don't know if I can do it," they admitted, the finality of the words hanging heavy in the air. And just like that, the game was over. Final verdict. The nominee's breaking point. Will they stand or fall? In the end, the nominee couldn't handle the heat. Under the crushing pressure of Adam Schiff's unrelenting questions, they folded, revealing their weakness. The moment of truth had arrived, and they just couldn't step up to the plate. Will anyone be able to take a stand when it matters most? Or are they all just puppets in a dangerous game? This is far from over. Don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next bombshell.